Good afternoon and welcome to the fireside chat on the Global Capability Centers. India has made rapid strides towards establishing itself as a key tech outsourcing destination. Since those early days, which was fueled by the tech firms, the services sector has come a long way. The country currently is the global engineering and R&D hub for major multinational banks, consulting firms, software firms, and manufacturing. This actually has given rise to global capability centers. Today, I'm in conversations with Anshul Jain, where we would be discussing the key findings of our latest report as we closely look at the India GCC industry, its evolution over time, key drivers, and how the industry is now driving strategic innovation to most of the global corporations. So Anshul, welcome to the fireside chat.
Great.
Before we start, would be good we launch the report together on the Global Capability Center.
Yeah, it's a fantastic report. I've gone through it, obviously. Let's do this. All right.
Thank you, Anshul. So the past few years has been a great time for the commercial real estate industry, and we've been growing at a very good pace. But what is interesting is the pace of growth has been significant for the GCC industry. In fact, since 2014 to 19, the GCC industry has grown fivefolds. Anshul, what are your thoughts on this? How have you seen this space evolve over a period of time, and especially more focus on lately the GCC space?
Right. So let me take the audience back to the I would say the pre-FDI period, the press note 2005, which liberalized the real estate sector, right? So even before that, what did actually lead to liberalization of real estate? In late 90s, we had the first wave of outsourcing, which really started, right? With people like GE setting up their own center, which they eventually spun off to become Genpact. You had British Airways setting up their own center here in India. So there were some early entrants, and it really started with simple cost arbitrage, right? It was a case of using the language skills of India and cost arbitrage, nothing else. And therefore, it started with call centers, right? And the call centers pretty quickly morphed into process outsourcing, right? So people started outsourcing simple processes like accounting and accounting finance, HR processes, just really processing very simple tasks, right? The call center started dying down at the time because, after the first wave of call center outsourcing, there were a lot of pushbacks around accent issues that Indians had when they were servicing American clients or British clients, and so on and so forth. But the process outsourcing gained momentum, and I think pretty much by the end of the zeros, we had more complex processes being outsourced to India. And I think post the GFC, the global financial crisis of 2008, I think that accelerated even more because there was a pressure on American companies and British companies to find more efficiencies onshore for themselves, right? So a combination of cost arbitrage and more complex processes started getting outsourced. Early 10s, that continued to, the whole industry continued to metamorphosize. I think the industry, the skill sets really developed even further. And what we started seeing, what really got started with the first GCC, so as to say, or amongst the first GCC was the Jack Welch R&D Center in Bangalore, which was in 2000s. That started to gain momentum come 2015. So the first wave was really your call centers and simple processes. The second wave was advent of some GCCs, but more complex processes. And the third wave, which is, let's say, 3A pre-COVID, was much more complex processes, value-add processes, in the stream of data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, data security, and so on and so forth. And we saw quite a push just pre-COVID on that. And my bet is post-COVID that will accelerate in phase 3B even more. So that's how I've seen the industry changing.
So actually, what you're saying is from a very simple process, it kept on getting complex, and now we've reached a stage where even very complex operations are performed by the GCC centers.
Yeah.
So interestingly, over a time period, and when it's written in the report that India has close to about 45% of, both by footprint, by market share, the number of GCCs, we are about 45% of the global population. So two things very important, which we would like to understand from you. One, and most of these are US and EMEA. So how do you see, what is the skill sets? Why is it that India is a preferred destination? And I'll also like you to give us some insights on how are particularly China and Eastern European companies also looking at this GCC?
See, all the factor advantages India has remain in place, right? So you've got 1 million graduates coming out a year. You've got clearly a cost differential which still exists, and there's a significant cost differential. The exchange rate keeps helping because every year or every couple of years you've got, on an average, I think it's about 4%, 5% depreciation a year, which continues to create the cost advantages, right? But what really helps is, I think, one, language, and more importantly, the ability of our undergraduates to reskill themselves as they enter the industry, right? Because if you talk to most of the GCCs, they say the quality of undergraduates is great, but the skills as they come out of the Indian engineering system is perhaps not to the same level as they would like to be. But what's very important is that within the first 6 months, 9 months, the experience of most GCCs have been that they're able to retrain, reskill, and that the adaptability of the Indian graduates is exceptionally great, right? And then they are in the system and off they go. China will obviously, it's a massive manufacturing hub, and we've seen a lot of manufacturing R&D related GCCs based in China. And I think that will continue to be the case. They've got, if we have 1 million graduates, they have 1.5 million graduates a year, right? But I think 2 or 3 things have happened, which has promoted a China plus one strategy for most of the corporates globally when there was only China as far as manufacturing was concerned. Clearly, the trade wars, the unpleasantness that's been created across the world. Language is always an issue, right, in China. So people, I think, have moved away in a China plus one policy. Not to say that, China will drop from favor. I think they'll continue to be in favor from a manufacturing GCC perspective, and will continue to grow, perhaps at the same speed as India will in the future. You spoke about Eastern Europe. I think it's primarily a proximity and language for particularly French companies, German companies, where they can find similar language skills, similar culture in Eastern Europe, and most importantly, proximity. You can get to an Eastern Europe, which is a much cheaper destination in an hour's flight, hour and a half's flight. So I think that will continue, but simply the scale of just people availability, skill availability in Eastern Europe is always going to be a challenge. So yes, it will be a highly specialized location for a GCC from a language perspective, but I don't see the scale being a huge challenge to a market like India.
So what I could see from your answer, one is the early mover advantage which India has, and one important thing which you mentioned was the adaptability of the skill force to change domains and again excel. So absolutely, most of the innovation could happen in India is what?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is very interesting. So I move on to the next one, and which was again a very interesting insight which came from this report. We always had this notion that IT and IT segment is the largest contributor to the GCCs, But what this report actually talks about is basically the ER&D, which is the engineering and manufacturing R&D, which has the maximum centers and the maximum footprint. Are you surprised?
I think in the first instance, I was, when I first looked at it and I said, wow, I mean, something's clearly working. Obviously, as I said, China plus one strategy and diversification probably worked. But what's also very important is that all the engineering R&D, not all, but a bulk of engineering R&D is also moving towards tech-enabled R&D, right? So talk about the automotive sector, it's about designs, right? It's about digital designs. It's not only designing the shape of the car, but design of the future engines, the future, just the nuts and bolts, right? And there's a lot of tech involved there, right? So there is tech integration, right? If you talk about the robotics industry with the explosion of e-commerce, the robotics, particularly in the physical robotics of moving stuff around, etc. I know a lot of R&D is happening here in India around that, and advanced robotics is being considered. AI and machine learning is now virtually a part of every manufacturing unit, right? And that's all tech enabled, right? And I think that's where, again, India has a massive factor advantage, being the tech brain of the world in many ways, right? And I think that's really what we are seeing.
So, when I look at the entire GCC space, and as I mentioned earlier, it's basically the US firms which are more dominant in the GCC space, followed by EMEA, and this is for all the GCC set up in India. But what is interesting also, again from the report, is that the share of Asian countries is increasing. The share of Asian countries which are setting up GCC centers in India is increasing. So how do you see this trend?
So simply, Asia arrived late to the party. I think US really started most of the innovation and the initial billion-dollar companies, the so-called unicorns, were all coming out of the US, and then obviously Europe followed pretty close to the heel. It's only in the last few years we're beginning to see Asian unicorns, in particular non-China Asian unicorns, because Chinese unicorns tend to have a large talent pool of their own to kind of capitalize, and therefore GCCs of those unicorns, I would expect, are already entrenched and present in China. But if you look at non-China unicorns, they are more recent, right? And I think that's really the phenomenon we're seeing. Clearly, we've spoken about next decade being the decade of Asia from a growth perspective, from an innovation perspective, from just wealth perspective. So we'll see more and more of such traction, and I expect over years that 20% would probably increase. Let's not write off US or Europe. I mean, US still remains the global powerhouse of innovation. They've always been on the cutting edge. So I do expect US to have the dominant position in Indian GCC for a long time.
So you're saying that there will be a double impact where US firms will have a dominant place in the GCC industry, as well as now you'll have the Asians joining the bandwagon. So there's going to be a huge.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken about in some of the other reports, we've spoken about the fact that of the 700 million feet of absorption that Asia is expected to have in the next 10 years, office absorption, we've said 400 million square foot is India. That's 60%, right? All of that will be fueled by the growth that we are going to see across the world of GCCs, whether it's Asian growth and of course the continued growth of Americas.
So what is interesting, Anshul, from your conversation, that out of this 400 million, the way we look at the report, close to 120 million would just be these GCCs. So that is close to about 30% of what absorptions which we would see in the next decade. So it gives the prominence to the GCCs as how they will reshape the industry.
And if I'm a betting man, I would say it'll be faster. I know the data says 120, 35%, but if I'm a betting man, I'd say I'll bet on the fact that GCCs will go at a faster clip.
So just as a snapshot for GCCs across the cities, we have Bangalore, undisputed leaders currently, more than 30% market share for all these GCCs in India. Hyderabad catching fast, primarily tech, engineering R&Ds, and part of it healthcare and pharma. Delhi NCR very closely following both these cities with corporate headquarters. Mumbai on the outer fringes, we have the BFSI sectors, GCCs. Pune catching up big time to Bombay. Chennai also looking big on BFSI, engineering and manufacturing. But what is also interesting is that the second tier two cities, whether it's Ahmedabad, Vadodara, Coimbatore, Chandigarh, these are also catching up. There are close to about 15 plus cities which house more than 770 GCCs. So we do understand COVID has significantly impacted how we work, where we work. So just want to take your insight. How do you see the geographical spread of these GCCs going forward?
So let's talk in two, phase A, phase B, pre-COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah.
All right. Pre-COVID, I would actually turn this question back to you, Badal, where I'd say, tell me how many 500,000+ square foot transactions were happening in which cities, right? So, talk about Bangalore, Hyderabad, the big cities, right?
So it was primarily Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, at times NCR. That's it.
I mean, in that order.
In that order.
In that order, yeah. Right? So, and that clearly remains the preference of our clients. It's clearly where the talent is, right? And we've seen sort of Pune catching up. We've seen, Delhi NCR, Noida, Gurgaon sort of moving up. And I think if you talk about a pre-COVID situation, what was the traction were you seeing in the 15 other sort of cities?
Very little. I mean, it was primarily these 6 cities where we were seeing growth, and primarily there were talks about exploring those locations, but eventually the demand will fall into any of these 6 cities.
Yeah. So post-COVID, I think this may change, is my opinion. It's a hypothesis. I think there's been a lot of forecasts being made from a post-COVID perspective as to how the office designs will look like, and how where will people be like to be based. It's work from home, work from anywhere. WFA has emerged, and I think a lot of that is still really on the drawing board. Okay, and we've got to be really careful in terms of saying, okay, this is going to be the trend, right? But having said that, I think there's a hypothesis which is emerging, and that hypothesis is based on discussion with multiple clients and what's happening. And here's the hypothesis, right? Work from anywhere will be a reality.
Yeah.
Right. Now, does that mean work from home? Possibly to some extent, maybe 10 or 15% more than what was happening before. Closer home, maybe 20 to 30%, right? The massive office centers, to say 1 million square foot campuses, etc., they may change shape, where you might say there is an office campus, but it's more of a hub and spoke model. Okay. Now, the hub and spoke model is, I want to be in the tech center of the city, right? So let's say it's Bangalore and I want to be on Outer Ring Road. Mm-hmm. But instead of 1 million square foot, I'll have 500,000 on the Outer Ring Road and have maybe 250,000 square foot dotted across the cities, closer to where people live. Now let's stretch that and say, can this be in a tertiary city, a secondary city, in the 15 cities that you are talking about? Pre-COVID, the skills were all migrating into Bangalore, migrating into Bombay, migrating into Delhi NCR. Staying in tough circumstances, living in tough circumstances, a whole lot of traffic, pollution, just tough city life. But that is where the career was at the end of the day. I think post-COVID or through this year, people have learned that good work can be delivered from wherever they are, right? And I'm not suggesting that everybody works from home, because that's not going to happen. Ultimately, we all want an office environment. But I live in a small city, let's say, and I've got a massive center. When I say massive, couple 100,000 square foot center in a small city. But it's not just one company. There are 10 companies, 20 companies which are opening couple 100,000 square foot, right? So suddenly I have an ecosystem of career within my city, right? The city develops. I'm closer home. I don't have to bear the traffic and the pollution, and not everybody is migrating into a larger city. And yet I have the career, right? At least to some extent. And I think that'll happen. The experimentation of that has already started. The 15 cities that you were talking about pre-COVID were gaining traction. I think they'll gain faster traction as we move into a post-COVID situation. Whether it'll sustain or not, it's hard to say 5 years from later, but you'll certainly see more of that kind of coming up. And therefore, I think the prominence will start. And this is not a new phenomenon globally, right? So if you go to a UK or a US, etc., there are plenty of secondary cities which are centers of businesses, right? And people are very happy to live there and work there.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps that kind of transformation we may see here in India.
So interestingly, Anshul, and I tend to agree with you. When it all started, the tier two play, and you would agree with me, everybody was looking at a real estate arbitrage,
Correct.
which was not there.
Correct.
But now the queries and the conversations have been that with most of the larger corporations, most of them seeing the productivity be almost the same. And this is not all processes, but some processes where they've seen productivity, no loss, and they've been pretty happy with it. They are not now talking about all these things which you spoke about, pollution, travel, cost, even the cost of talent in tier two, tier three cities. So the conversation from a real estate arbitrage has changed to more on these software issues.
Yeah.
So when the conversation would change, I think so we would see some traction. So I would tend to agree with you that once the play becomes more on apart from real estate, then it will start gaining the tier two, tier three.
Because the skill is there. And at the end of the day, remember what I said, that most companies are reskilling anyways, reskilling the graduates, right? So I think it's more of whether the talent is willing to stay put in the smaller cities. And I think that's the massive mindset transformation that's happened as a result of COVID.
So most of the, the other hindering factors you rightly pointed out was the kind of opportunities which, the talent would have in the larger cities to the smaller cities. But once you have the ecosystem being developed, then possibly this would accelerate further.
Absolutely.
So Anshul, interestingly, digital transformation is one of the biggest drivers for these GCCs. You talked about cloud computing, AI, machine learning. We talk about connected cars, home automation, whole lot of things we talk about. Now again, COVID-19 has accelerated these, these accelerations on the digital side. So, this is a much broader question. When these things are happening, one, how have you seen this transformation? And my second question would be, how do you see this impacting not only the GCC, but the overall IT sector in India?
Yeah. So depending on who you talk to, everybody talks about a tech acceleration, right? Depending on who you talk to, people will say it's 5 years of tech in 6 months, 10 years of tech in 6 months, or 2 years of tech in 6 months. But there is a tech acceleration, right? And I think if you combine all the factor advantages of India I spoke about, the need for tech acceleration, right? You'd probably see a huge impetus in the GCC industry as we move forward in a post-COVID environment. Now, what's going to happen is, don't expect that tomorrow suddenly the whole market will go through the roof, right? But I think the planning for that, to say the need for everything that we spoke about, which is creating that acceleration. I think you'll see much more money being put into R&D, right? And all of that will obviously benefit the whole industry in India. There's a reason why we've seen, particularly in the last 3-4 years, GCCs setting up their own. So global capability centers, by definition, is
their own setup.
Own setup, right? Because the whole kind of tech acceleration, the way it's taken place, and for the largest corporates in the world, who are basically saying how do they transform themselves, and the tons of clients that we have who are as we speak, are transforming themselves and reshaping themselves as to for the organization of future, right? And that future for most of these depend on what kind of, innovation that they can bring to their clients, or globally, right? Uh, so therefore, the GCCs become a very integral part, core competency, effectively. And what's core is you'd like to keep, and you'd like to push a lot of money into core, which is why we're seeing, even from a shape, size, the quality of these GCCs, they're kind of improving manifold. The second aspect of this is GCCs of smaller companies, right? And I think that's where probably you'll see a third-party outsourcing. We've seen people, the big 4 or 5 of India, Accenture, Cognizant, Wipro, HCL, and so on and so forth, really reinventing themselves so that they can be the tech enablers or innovation centers for third-party companies. Less of that will happen because, as I said, it's core competency. Most companies would like to keep it, but the smaller companies might say, "Hey, maybe we are better off a third party doing it," and therefore these companies are also changing their model significantly to work with the Fortune thousands of the world effectively, so that they can provide a third party, right? And in few years' time, we might actually see, the GCC phenomenon stabilizing, as in the third-party companies really learning how to provide these services, working with much more integrated fashion with their clients. And you might just see another wave of outsourcing. So this is offshoring into India. Then you might see another wave of outsourcing where these companies might get spun off as separate companies, may get bought out by an Accenture of the world, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, it depends a lot on the ability to stay at the cutting edge, and that cutting edge will continue to change and continue to change faster in a post-COVID environment.
So, Anshul, that was more specific to the GCC environment. Also would like to take your insights into with this, with the cost pressures and the kind of, the talent available, the kind of tech acceleration happening. On the normal side, how do you see the IT industry shaping up in India post-COVID?
So the IT industry, again, I would say a huge acceleration. And at the end of the day, what we saw post GFC, global financial crisis, right, where people said, okay, a lot of jobs have been lost around the world, so the outsourcing to India or offshoring to India may decrease. It did not. It actually accelerated, right? And I think the same thing is going to happen. Think about the 3 or 4 aspects, right? Why India will become even more attractive. So skills, I think, is given, right? We've spoken enough about it. There is the exchange rate I spoke about. So there's a 10% arbitrage on exchange rate. Let's say from 2019 to 2020. That's cost advantage, right? Your cost of skill, cost of labor, in 21 is likely to be very similar to 2019. Frozen pay cuts in 2020 as hard as they were. So, but it's a 2-year wage inflation which hasn't really happened, right? Number 2. Number 3, real estate related, right? So again, rental growth in real estate is not happening, at least for the time being. In some cases, there's some benefits being offered depending on the client, etc. So I'd say 0 to -5% on kind of real estate related costs. So overall, your cost advantage, you're suddenly looking a lot more attractive, right? Now, imagine what's going to happen 2020. The stock markets run up across the world. The PE multiples have gone up significantly. Now, what would companies need to do in 21? Just manage their earnings, right? To manage the earnings, the one thing you got to continue to be very sharp on is your costs, right? And I think you will therefore see an acceleration of offshoring, outsourcing, whatever it may be, from Western and more developed Asian economies, right? And I think that will have a massive impact on a broader IT, BPO, BPM sector.
And Anshul, you said in the early part of our conversation, and you touched upon a very important point, which was the ability of the skill here to reskill. And the way we've been talking and we're getting the feelers from most of our clients that the post-COVID world will be different. I mean, the technologies, the adoptions are going to be different. It will be more touchless. The way you interact with technology is going to drastically change.
Yeah.
So all these augur well for the Indian IT industry, because that's where this.
We are a young and agile country at the end of the day, right? And I think one of the big things that actually happened in COVID-19 was the risk that was associated with India actually dissipated significantly, because overnight, literally, the business continuity for millions of companies actually kicked in. What was it, 22nd March or 24th March, whenever the lockdown was announced?
Yeah.
Literally overnight, the BCP Act kicked in for companies, and in a week's time, everybody was up and running with no disruption or no significant disruption to global operation. Now that has given a very, very significant, I would say, impetus to the Indian, to just something around, I would say the reduction in perception of risk of operating out of India has gone up manyfold, right? And I think you've seen it, Badal, in the last maybe 3 or 6 months. You've seen a lot of demand which kind of fell off, right? Coming back. I mean, I mean, do you see that going? Is it just a momentary thing, or how are you seeing the pipeline? I mean, that will speak a lot about the Indian IT industry.
So a very good question, Anshul. I think so. We saw demand, falling all across all sectors, all cities in primarily Q2. Q3 was weak, and most of the corporates were not sure of what direction would they take. But the way we are looking at our conversations, which have been starting Q4, and the kind of demand which we are now kind of seeing, to give you a semblance on numbers. So on a gross leasing basis in 2019, which was again, we were talking about this wave, was close to about 70 million, was the gross absorption which happened all across the country. Now, interestingly, as tracking now, we already Q3 we have crossed 40 million, grossly, and so it's not that bad. And the way
and did you think back in April that that will be, let's say we'll finish the year at 50, let's call it 50
we'll cross 50. That's what I was saying. We will kind of cross 50, and we always compare to what we did in 19, but the best year to 19 was 18, and 18 we did 55 million gross leasing. So we are there. So, and as we're tracking with our research, we also see that we've never, even in these times, we've not had one quarter of negative absorption. It's been positive for India.
And what's the pipe for 21?
So I think so we should, the way it looks like, we should be at about 60 million plus gross leasing. That's very clear, if not more. Should all these things which we spoke about, it comes back post-vaccination, we could, because the way, Anjul, we discussed this earlier, we were already into the third wave of outsourcing when this hit. The kind of surge which we are seeing in the leasing activity, I think so we would be catching this surge. And if everything goes well, we should be hitting the 2019.
And the gross leasing, of course, means a lot of people are moving from older generation buildings to newer generation buildings, right? And I think with the investment that GCCs, it's going to come in GCCs, you're probably going to see an acceleration of people upscaling their quality.
Absolutely. And what we are also seeing, these conversations change where when the developers themselves are upgrading their assets. So all these things are doing. So I would say 2020, we are leaving 2020 with a very positive disposition on looking at 2021. And if the vaccination holds good and we are back, we should look at something at 2019 and beyond.
And I would think that buildings which are good quality, which have been upgraded, which have been upgraded to a post-COVID standard, you'll probably see a massive flight to quality. Now,
Absolutely.
the GCC phenomenon was already driving flight to quality pre-COVID, right? Because they were their own centers and they were hugely value-added centers as opposed to just a cost arbitrage kind of center, right? So you're already seeing major global GCCs going into the best quality buildings and offering the best facility to their people, right? And therefore, the acceleration post-COVID
is going to be fun.
And the flight to quality, so I don't see a problem at all for the Indian A-grade industry, real estate industry.
So great, Anshul. I think so. We've covered the report in brief and discussed quite interesting facets coming from this report, as well as your knowledge on what's happening in the Indian real estate industry. We have the QR codes now available on the screens to you for downloading this report. Can we have the QR code? And we're happy to take questions. And thank you, Anshul. It was really nice chatting up with you and understanding this. And we'll take up the questions now from the audience.
It was great.
Thank you, Badal. Thank you, Anshul. That was indeed a fascinating conversation, and we're at Conversations with Cushman and Wakefield. Like Badal said, this is a conversation, so please key in your questions there. And we already have a few here with us, so we'll just kickstart with that. Badal, the first question that pops up, I'll throw that at you. It says real estate costs are lowest in India compared to other APAC cities. And that is one of the key factors that makes India such an attractive destination. Do you foresee any correction?
So great question. I think so. We've kind of briefly answered it during our conversations, but see, it's moved beyond the real estate arbitration. So it's all about talent and how the talent is adapting is what we discussed. The total pool of talent available in India, or the total talent available in the countries where those knowledge-based functions have to be performed, will determine demand. Real estate is not going to determine. Yes, you need to have quality real estate. You need to have centers with what Anshul just mentioned on the environment, the buildings, and the work environments being created within that. But mostly it will be driven by talent and the pool of talent. And India has the advantage of having the maximum talent. So, and it is just keeping on growing, because we talked about the 1 million graduates coming out of the universities every year. So these are the main drivers. So we definitely see that the GCCs and the outsourcing industry will continue to grow and at an accelerated pace, but it will all be on talent, not on real estate.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree, we can't become New York in terms of our real estate pricing, right?
No, but
somewhere underlying, that cost advantage has to be there. But 100% agree with you. I think absolutely. It's the, as long as we have the talent, which is at the cutting edge, and the young population of India and all of that really helps, right?
Being a broker, I thought we should be focusing more on the New York rentals. so yeah, but I agree with you. Yeah. You have a point there.
Yeah. So I'll take the next question, and Anshul, I'll ask you to address that. The current trade disputes between some of the largest economies like the US and China have called into question the future of globalization. Will the protectionist trends visible globally result in the mandates of GCC being curtailed? I assume no, considering all the discussions you had.
Yeah, the protectionism, the global politics has been moving to right wing, right? And it has been moving for quite some time, for about almost, I'd say, 5 to 6 years. And therefore, but that hasn't really dampened the enthusiasm of, growth that multinationals want. Ultimately, the businesses are structured globally and they're becoming more global. So it's paradoxical, right? Where politics is actually going more right-wing and protectionist, but businesses are actually going a lot more global, right? Because ultimately, and people are going a lot more global, right? Because everybody wants to be a global citizen today. So I think these kind of pushes and pulls will remain, but I don't think it'll impede the growth of GCCs, because GCCs will have to go. That's the reality of business. You go where the talent is, right? You go where the cost arbitrage is, and you go where the best innovation, where you can get best innovation for your customers, clients. And I think in all those segments, India has a competitive advantage today.
Thank you, Anshul. So I'll just take the next question, and that says, we spoke about tier 2 locations. Will be good to hear your perspective on what are the top 3 criteria that will be used to evaluate a tier 2 location.
So I'll take that, Anshul. I think so. The very basis, the way we are connected as a country, the most important factor apart from the other factors which are there is going to be connectivity. Is the first important criteria. How is that city connected? Because those connections have to be made with Indian cities as well as how it's collected globally. So connectivity is of paramount importance. The other is the availability of talent. So in case tier 2 cities have colleges, have graduates coming out, because that will make them stay in their own city within their own environment. But that is number 2. And the third is how the city is going to evolve, the livability index in that city. So these are the 3 prominent factors which will be the factors which, apart from others, there could be many other factors, but these are the 3 top factors which would help a tier 2 city be more attractive than the other.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. I think it's very well said. I think pre-COVID, probably it was a lot more cost arbitrage, but I think that's going to just go away. And the points that Badal mentioned are
I think that absolutely ties in with all the cities that you earlier mentioned, from Chandigarh to Coimbatore, they all kind of fit that bill very well. The next question, and I think any one of you can take that. Where do you see co-working space providers post-pandemic?
That's totally...
GCCs and co-working players, but I think it's an important question because first of all, let's zoom out of the co-working as I think it's just a term. It's not really in a concept that co-working was 4 or 5 years ago, and anyway is very different. So let me change that term to managed workspaces. Now, what's managed workspace doing in a post-COVID environment, even in pre-COVID environment? There were, in my mind, capital providers, design and environment providers, and operational, just taking the operational headache off, right? So capital, innovation through design and environment, and operational efficiency, right? And I think those 3 will gain super importance as you move forward, because of course, from a business model perspective, is also flexibility. They will provide flexibility with shorter term leases or just other flexibilities, right? Now, will that gain importance post-COVID? All of those factors, 100%, right? Will there be 300 co-working providers successful in India? No, because in any case, it is a new industry, a lot of players rushed in, the efficiencies would have been driven by market. COVID has driven that, shakeout, right? So you'll probably see 5 or 6 large enterprise providers emerging strong out of it, or stronger, because that flexibility is required. The need for flexibility, need for everything I said, is going to be there. So I think that industry will actually flourish. The top 6 companies will actually flourish as we move forward.
I have a question there. Do you think some more will come in tier 2 if the hub and spoke model kind of picks up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I think they will, because particularly the capital, the operational efficiency, any company going into tier 2 where they haven't been in that, it's outside their operational zone. So in fact, they would want to outsource that to a third party even more, right? the risk profile for the managed service provider in the third city would be very different, right? Because should this company leave, and should they not be able to backfill it? So I think the risk profile would be very different, but therefore what you will see is perhaps the flexible part of the offering of a managed service provider in a tertiary or a secondary city may be a bit lower. So the business model may be slightly different, but I think there's no reason why a managed service provider won't go in with a large corporate into a secondary city.
Interesting times. Okay, Badal, maybe I can throw this question at you. Globally ranked third startup ecosystem after United States and United Kingdom. Can India be the Silicon Valley of East for startup community?
So I think so. It already is, but nevertheless, the question is there. I think so. Yes, very clearly. As for the startup, just to give you a semblance, in Asia Pacific, we as a country have the biggest startup, companies. And as we talk about it post-COVID, this is increasing with newer startup and newer, ideas coming up. And most importantly, the spirit of entrepreneurship, which has been fueled by these startups, the success which these startups have got, certainly it all gives a very positive disposition to, India being the Silicon Valley of the East.
Thank you, Badal. The next question, Anshul, I'll probably you can take this up. And it really says is, given most of the enterprises worldwide are exploring uses of exponential technologies to develop newer and best-in-class solutions, will India-based GCCs leapfrog next growth using new edge digital technologies? That's a long question.
Answer is short, yes.
Answer is short, yes.
I like
no, I mean, okay. This is a given, right? I think I've been saying, unless we are able to innovate, and also GCCs, if they're not innovating, they stop becoming core to companies' operation, right? So I think the innovation is key. Now that innovation is also global, right? So it's not, we are going to be very connected to different parts of the world in how you're going to be innovating, right? So it's almost like a connected innovation, but you've got to be at the forefront, right? I mean, I came across a startup firm here in India. I should remember the name. It's missing, but their ambition is to launch 50 micro satellites into space in a startup, right? Kids, 23-year-old guy, right? And their first satellite is going to be up in the space in middle of 21. So it's not a idea, it's reality, right? And they will have this network of micro satellites going up. It's a massive leap into the next into what's next for the kind of space industry, right? We hear a lot about what SpaceX is doing, etc., etc. Now, obviously, this is happening in India from an Indian startup, right? And you'll see tons of that happening. So whether it's within GCC, whether it's outside, all I'm saying is this kind of talent is available in India. The work that's happening is at the next level. Whether that will be within the GCC kind of setup or independently, it will happen.
Yeah. Correct. Anshul, I'll also give the next question to you, considering I know that's close to your heart, the workplace. So it says GCCs are set up on international workplace standards, and obviously there are more spends on the fit out, and they're really trying to create an engaging workplace. How do you perceive the return to office trend in this context, and given the importance of workplace for GCC?
So I think return to office is pretty simple. I think it's vaccination driven, right? So we will all have, all the multinational companies in India in particular will have different strategies around RTO. But ultimately it's vaccine driven, right? So vaccinations come, people gain more confidence and they'll come back. Designs obviously will change very significantly. Will the social distancing remain? I would say no. Because ultimately, I think is the first line we read whenever we start, in the school. I don't know, grade 4, 5, 3, whenever it is, whether it's biology, sociology related chapters, is humans are social animals, right? So I think it's the first line that everybody remembers, right? And I think that's the basis of humanity. So I don't think this whole social distancing will remain, but I think the office designs will change because right now the thought process, chances of infection and viruses in different shapes and forms may keep coming in future. It may be deadly, it may not be deadly, I hope. But even maybe just awareness of protecting yourself from common cold, which has not been there, right? So every year, tons of us just get common cold and we say, kya thand lagi hai, thodi si cold ho gaya hai, and we are in our offices, we are working. But I think post-COVID, it's the responsibility of the offices and responsibility of self to say, why even pass that simple infection of common cold to anyone else, right? And therefore, I think the office designs will hopefully evolve in that direction where you'll see a bit more protectionism coming in, a bit more change in behaviors, design driving the change in behaviors. So that certainly will happen. I think in India, coming to an Indian context, particularly for third-party outsourced companies, what we've seen is a lot more very dense spaces, right? I mean, the density had dropped from 100, 120 square foot per person to almost 60 square foot per person. That'll change, right? That'll change. Not that I'm saying it'll be lavish workspaces, but that'll change through how many people you want to be in the office at, so all those will happen. I think it's a combination of the work practices, design, and the desire to make the workplace, including the building, a lot more safer to work in than what we in Indian context have been used to.
Thank you. So we are really coming to a close. I'll just take a couple of last questions. I think we touched upon this, but we can just readdress it. Which countries are directly competing with India for GCC?
Good. All right. This is the point where I say you go ahead. All right. No, I think, we spoke about Eastern Europe, this Philippines. Obviously, Philippines has always been in news. Language, skills, very similar. I think you'll probably see countries which are closer home, cheaper, and have a same language. I think you'll probably see those countries competing for GCCs. For example, a lot of Spanish-speaking GCCs have moved into some of the South American countries. Is it to scale? No, but you've seen that movement. Eastern Europe, we've already spoken about. China will always be a factor, one way or the other. They're not going to be left behind on the whole kind of GCC race. And of course, I think India will continue to lead the pack.
So just on stats on this, we have some stats where India has about 45%. We spoke about it. Eastern Europe is about 25%. China is between 20 to 23%. And rest of the others are about close to about the remaining 7%. So this is how the spread has been.
Thank you. So this is really one of the last questions we're taking. With skill sets for our engineering graduates still not par with corporate expectations, where do you see the challenges in sustaining the fast tech acceleration that is taking place? Will it have an impact or lost opportunity for business that can be given to the country?
Sorry, which particular skill set? That's kind of hard to comment, but I think the general, I would say things are moving towards AI, ML, so I think advanced coding, advanced sort of software research and development, blockchain technologies. I'm not convinced that our engineering graduates are being taught to the level at which the companies, at which things are being kind of spoken about and developed, right? Frankly, anything within a government-related syllabus is just so hard to change, right? The private colleges are catching up. but again, they have to go through, I think, an accreditation process, etc. So it ain't that fast, right? And the point is that the technologies are changing so fast that you almost have to be, from an education system, you almost have to be kind of changing yourself every 6-9 months. And that is very hard to sort of achieve in my mind. And therefore, I think the training facilities that a lot of bigger companies are putting up, that becomes very crucial. The good part is that the underlying education is there. So you don't need to put people through a 3-year program, right? Sometimes a 6-week program, sometimes a 3-month program, 6-month program is more than enough.
Yeah, the Stanchart Learning Center in Singapore is completely around upskilling.
Correct, right. And I think the upskilling and reskilling needs to be, it almost will become the reality in everyone's life, right? Because the industries are also changing very fast. And you can't be in an age-old industry and hope to retire from there. You'll have to reskill and move into a new industry and new ways of working. Right?
One that, and I think so, Anshul, the way the world is going to evolve with the kind of accelerating changes happening, there will be informal sector also which will be doing this upskilling. So it will not only be the formal sector which would be these many graduates. But
no, you're right. And the best example of this is actually NIIT when they started in a pre-Y2K era, where people were coming out left, right, and center from different just simple colleges, going to do the 1-year, 2-year NIIT program, learn basic coding, get a passport to US, and that was really where the tech industry started. So you're absolutely right.
And of course, you can see these days kids starting at 6 or 8 to code.
Yeah.
So the skilling is happening quite. So really, we have a few more questions, but mindful of the time, thank you for that wonderful conversation. I'll hand it back to you, Badal, for just wrapping it up for us.
Yeah, thank you, Avantika. So on conclusion, very clearly, the GCC sector is definitely going to accelerate. Currently, which is about 20%, we are forecasting anywhere between 30-35% in the next decade. But what me and Anshul discussed, it could be much more than that. Very important point, which from the conversation and the most significant one, which I would take, is the innovation and the reskilling and the talent available to do that in India. So that will happen. We dominate the market and we'll continue to dominate. Outsourcing is definitely going to increase with the impetus on Make in India and the other global corporates looking at the manufacturing sector. We'll see the emergence of ER&Ds in a much more significant manner. Pharma would also form part of this GCC with the kind of things going around in their world. Tier 2 cities looks like with the current environment, they would get into the mainstream and they would offer the hub and spoke arrangement, and we will see a much more growth coming in those cities as well. So primarily these, Anshul, any more concluding remarks from your end to the conversation we've had?
I think it's, I'm very bullish on India. Of course, Asia, it's the decade of Asia, as I said, but I'm very bullish on India. And, just see not small, but, things like, you think about vaccines, right? And where have all the vaccines being developed, right? Of course, it's US, UK, we're talking about Russian vaccine. But, big part of that is being manufactured here and quick, right? I mean, think about it. Vaccines are being shipped out of India already, right? And so that's a massive, you think about our ability to move fast when we want to, and the world's faith in having India manufacture critical vaccinations at this point in time. I think all of this bode really well for our economy, and I think we'll continue to prosper that way. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Anshul. Thank you everybody for joining us, and look forward to any queries on the global capability centers, and happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you.